Today we are going to continue with the lecture on communication. In the last session we discussed about what is communication and what are the different types of communication, in which we covered interpersonal communication and communication at the group level. Today we are to discuss about communication at the organizational level and the barriers to effective communication. Before moving to that, for as a recapitulation, if we understand, like, communication helps us, there are four functions of communication. It helps us in controlling other person's behavior. It helps us in motivating people in a group, and it helps to share emotions, emotional expression, and also it all helps to share information. These are the four major functions of communication. Now, one of the major parts, important parts of communication is also listening, and which is one of the major responsibility of the receiver. Like, while that person is decoding the message, the listening style that is important, that has to be learned, is called the reflective listening style. In reflective listening, it is a skill which is developed. What is done is, with in reflective listening, while we are listening, we listen very carefully to what the other person is telling, and try to repeat the words, and we try to repeat the words back to the speaker to verify so the heard message, so that there is certain scope for correction if there is any misunderstanding. So, reflective listening, it emphasizes the role of the receiver, and it helps the receiver to understand the communication clearly and fully understand the message what has been sent by the sender, and it is very useful in problem solving. Otherwise, there could be a gap of information about what the sender wants the receiver to understand and what the receiver actually understands. So, the things which are there in reflective, which are more important for reflective listening, and listening first is listening very carefully, and we have to be very concerned about also what are the feelings that are communicated through the message, so that we can get to understand the emotional part of the message that is being communicated by the sender. Then is we should be responding to the communicator, but not try to lead the communicator to a certain thought process, and it helps in reducing the interpersonal barrier and understand people. So, generally there are four levels of verbal response when we are talking of reflective communication. So, first is like of first step is affirm communication, and affirm contact, rather, in that what is done is the communication is done assertively. Next is the thoughts are rearranged accordingly to the it's like rearranging thoughts, process and expressions. Next stage is that of paraphrase, in which whatever is heard by the receiver is reflected back to the speaker, and with as much of accuracy as possible. So, whatever we hear will try to accurately reflect back to the speaker as much we have heard it, and it helps in building empathy and we feeling and a positive bonding between the receiver and the sender. It generates a feeling of openness and acceptance. So, third step, important step, is clarify the implicit. What happens while we communicate certain things? In most cases, we do not communicate the whole thing. We take certain things like as implicit part of it, as accepted part of understanding, like we take it for granted. Maybe we want to tell something, we do not explicitly tell it, and we feel like the receiver is well matured enough to understand that part of the implicit communication. So, those part of reflective listening is one of the important functions of reflective listening, is also to bring out those unspoken words, and it builds greater awareness. Fourth part is reflecting core feeling. In that, what has happened is important thoughts and feelings are restated, so there is no scope for ambiguity, and it should be done with caution. In reflective listening, there is a part of non-verbal behavior also. It is important for the speaker to like one of those important things is that of eye contact. It helps the speaker to open a discussion, get to know like whether like your eye contacts, expression of eyes tell whether the listeners are listening properly, they're interested or not, whether they've understood things properly. And here we have to be concerned about the cultural differences also, and what eye contacts mean in different cultures and how it gets interpreted over there. So, and it helps the listener in sorting out the thoughts and feelings and identify personal responses. So, these are certain things that helps in like moving the communication forward when either we are in a face-to-face situation or we are not in a face-to-face situations. Maybe through electronic media we are hearing certain things and we want to interpret those things, we want to interpret the meanings of those things in how the speaker is telling and what that speaker is telling. So, reflective listening is one of the important criteria, important things, one of the important things to be learned how to do or how to listen in a reflective way if we want to go for effective communication. Next part of the discussion, which is very important, which we started with in the earlier class, is that of the richness of the media. We touched upon it in the earlier class and we thought of discussing it in this session, is the richness of the media through which the message is getting transmitted. What we find in this diagram is when we are talking of richness of the media, it means like whether it is the ability of the medium or channel to elicit or evoke meaning in the receiver. Ability of the medium to elicit or evoke meaning in the receiver. Now, when it is so, we find like there are some routine things that we do and some non-routine things that are as a part of the media, that communication that is done. And what you find, like, these can be classified as a part of, like, whether this medium is rich in terms of the ability to transmit or evoke meaning, and whether it is more rich. From the left hand side, we find formal reports, bulletins, memos, letters, pre-recorded speeches, electronic mail, online discussion, groupware, then this is voicemail, live speeches, telephone conversations, video conferences, face-to-face conversation. So again, there is a relationship between what we find over here, media richness, and the data capacity of the medium. What we find over here, face-to-face conversation is very high in the richness of the channel, but it is highest in the richness, but the data capacity is lowest. While in face-to-face communication, it is that we cannot share a bulk of information. The information shared is where its quantity is the lowest, but it is very highest in the level of richness, is that we can share our ideas, get to know like what others are understanding about it, and we can make ourselves communications clear in what we want to communicate and what the person has understood. So face-to-face conversation is highest in channel richness, but it is the lowest in as a part of the data capacity what is there. When we come to telephones over here, telephones are again high in channel richness, but it is low as far as data capacity is concerned. It's higher than face-to-face communication, but it is again lower than voicemails and all these things. When we are talking of memos and letters over here, this is low in channel richness, and but it's low or moderate in channel richness, and it's also moderate in data capacity. When you're talking of reports, formal reports and bulletins, these are highest in terms of data capacity, but it is low in terms of channel richness, because lots of data is shared, and we do not know, we do not have the feedback about whether people are understanding what is being communicated to them or not. So as we move up in the channel richness domain, maybe the data capacity of the medium becomes low. When you are low in channel richness, our data capacity is somewhat high. So we have to, like, when we want to communicate certain things, we have to do a mix and match of these things, these modes of communication, these channels of communication, so that whatever we are communicating, it's both like we are able to make others understand what we want to communicate, and we can communicate the whole thing, like quite a bit of information at a certain point of time. So we have to do a mix and match of these channels based on their channel richness and data capacity. We have already discussed about this part of like while we are talking of communicating in a group, and we found in formal channels of communication, like there are three ways of communicating. One is chain, one is wheel, and the other is the oil chain process. So what we may try to do over here, like, is to classify these things based on certain criteria. So we can classify these modes of communication, we can classify it based on certain aspects, criteria, that is called and we can take it over here, the chain, the wheel, and all channel. So these criteria according to which we can classify, first is the speed of communication. What we can find over here, in chain the speed is moderate, in wheel it is fast, and as all channel it is also fast, because you can, in all channel it is fast because here you are, and like you can move from here there and whichever way you want to go, and communication spreads very fast. The speed of communication is very high. Next we are talking of accuracy of communication, in which the chain, the accuracy of communication is high. In wheel also it is high, but in it all channel it is moderate. Reason is, like in chain, what we know is one person is communicating to the other person, this person is communicating to the other person. So one to one communication is there, and we know like who is communicating to whom, and there could be a process of validating and rechecking. In wheel also all the communication passes through the leader, so there is a great possibility of accuracy in it. But what happens in this one, all channels, everybody starts communicating with the other person, and there is hardly any check on what is the validity of the data and whether it's been transmitted in an accurate way or not. When we are talking of emergence of a leader, it is the third criteria, emergence of a leader. In chances of emergence of a leader is moderate in chain communication, because all are just passing information. It is very high in wheel because all information gets centrally passed on to one person, and that person passes that information to the outside parties or outside world. So there is a great chance of emergence of a leader when we are talking of wheel communication. But when we are talking of all channels communication, maybe possibility of emergence of leader is none. When you are talking of like the status of members and the satisfaction of members, what do we find? Status of members and their satisfaction, we find it is moderate in chain communication, and because one is communicating to the other, and there could be a hierarchy of like communication and maybe being closer to the boss, is low in terms of will, because some people get to communicate to the leader and some people may not. It's very high when you are talking of all channels, because everybody is trying to communicate with the other person, and that's why they get satisfaction from this communication. So these are like the small group networks and how the communication process is effective in these small group networks. What we'll try to, with this knowledge of media richness, with this knowledge of data capacity, data capacity of the richness, with the knowledge of reflective listening and how these chains are working in terms or things are working as a part of wheel, chain and all channels. With this knowledge of this communication medium and their networks and everything, we move to the next level of discussion where we try to see like what are the communication processes and systems when we are talking of communication at the organizational level. And communication at the organizational level is mainly through with the new types of technological communication, which if we bring in the idea of media richness we can and data capacity, we can understand they vary in their richness and data capacity. The types of the channels which are there are like intranet or internet and internet, then emails, voicemails, video conferences and teleconferencing and electronic meetings. Each of these have their both positives and negatives attached to the medium that is taken for communication, and we'll try to discuss some of these things in details. Like when we are talking of emails, now life is such that maybe we cannot think without an email, and like without an email, and like we just cannot think of it, and it has become a part of our life. Now these, what are these emails and what we do with it, and how to be person, how to become a person who is like who uses this emails with quite a good responsibility in the organization, is what is the focus now for the organization. Now when we are talking of emails, emails are organized, it's where we are using technology to internet to transmit and receive computer generated text and documents. So what it is done, it's more quickly written and quickly transmitted, like and it can be edited and stored, and main purpose is it can be sent to many. And it is also not required, and it can be stored, so it's not required that the person that you send the email to like reads it immediately and gives the feedback. That person can read the email at a considerable part of time later and then give the feedback. So these are maybe the advantages of emails, but emails are not without its drawbacks also. Like what happens, because it's more of like writing part of it, and you cannot see the person expressing the feeling, then what happens is there could be misrepresentation of the meaning, and negative messages can spread also through emails. So and it is very time consuming in nature, and sometimes it becomes so much irresistible for us, like we do find it difficult to stop ourselves from checking emails. Sometimes emotions are like emotions are expressed through long emails that we write, and those may hamper the organizational relationships. So like privacy issues are also there when you're talking of emails. If our email IDs get tapped, then our privacy regarding certain things is also becomes questionable. So we have to know, it's not only very important that we use emails for as one of the ways of doing things in organizations, but side by side we have to be very careful about what to do with these emails and how to use them. So if we can think of like certain thumb rules, like we should not check emails right at the morning when we are into the organization, because emails checking is a considerable time consuming factor. So try to check emails in batches. So you should delegate certain time of yours, like okay, this is the hour that I'm going to check emails. Never use the same email ID for like different purposes which are professional in nature and which are public in nature, or which are like personal in nature, privacy issues, because then you get to, like when the separation is done, then you get those messages which are appropriate for each of these categories, and your part of like segregating them into different headings will be less. So sometimes we have to delete emails also. Unnecessary emails come to us and we have to block those emails. There is another way, like what we call over here SMS or text messaging, which is like where instantaneously we send message about certain things that we feel like, certain happenings that we watch, etc. So what is important over here and how it is differentiated from email? Email is a long message, SMS is a short message. But we, for understanding those SMS, what we have to understand is the language of the SMS. So many people are not very comfortable with the language of the SMS, and they have to learn it to understand what is being told in that SMS. There are other parts like also networking software where we like register to that, like MySpace or Facebook, and then we know what are the functions and we try to form a common bond with the people that we network with. Blogs are again social media where entries are written and generally displayed in reverse chronological order. So one of these maybe type of blog is Twitter. So next important thing is that of video conferencing. In video conferencing, what happens, it helps people meet it helps you to meet with people in different locations, and what happens as if you are interacting face to face, but you are placed at different locations. What is important, like all are present at the same point of time and all are accessing the net at the same point of time when you are talking of video conferencing. So all these things may lead to certain, one of the important issues is like how to manage information. How to manage information may require, like there are two separate parts to it. One is information overload. The other is one is information overload, the other is could be like the security of the information, and whether like stress from bombarded with information at all times. So now what happens, even if you are in the aeroplane, you are not able to switch your phone because sometimes wireless are provided and you can be called through those. So these sometimes become irritated for the people who want to spend some time with the family members and maybe do keep oneself away from the job situation. But these things, like more the technology advances, it's more it's more easy for the organization to keep the track of employees who are there. So, that may lead to information overload. Next, what we will move on to knowledge management in the organizational context. In knowledge management, what is happening is it's a organization's way of generating collective wisdom and so that the right information gets to the right person at the right time. So, this is very important for the organization as they are important assets, and even if people are leaving, then this is the implicit asset that stays with you in terms of the knowledge and experiences and things learned out of that. So, another part of organizational communication is communicating externally. So, that through distinct programs like public relations, advertising, promotions, customer, client, patient service, and all these things. So, these are some of the different types of organizational communication. When we are talking of multicultural communication and we are talking of barriers to effective communication in multicultural communication. So, what are these barriers or factors that block significantly block or significantly distort the successful communication? And what happens over here in multicultural communication? So, there are the issues of ethnocentrism, tendency to consider the values, norms and customs of one's own country as superior. So, it may be implicit or explicit, and cultural insensitivity is not being sensitive to cultural differences. This is very important. Non-verbal cues in fact means different things to different cultures, and if you are not sensitive to the culture, then you may land up in great trouble, because non-verbal cues from different countries vary and mean totally different things. Next is intercultural communication succeeds when the communications communications are made in such a way it shows like communicators are aware of the cultural, structural cultural differences, significant cultural differences which are there, and it should be taken care of, like ethnocentric feelings, tendencies are avoided, and it should be like understanding like people are different and they understand things in different ways. So, these things of like if we start with these assumptions, maybe life is easy for us in communicating in different cultures. When we are talking of barriers to effective communication, barriers could exist within an individual or within the organization. So, when we are talking of barriers, we will try to see some of the points clubbed under different headings. First is like the frame of reference. What is it like? As we are discussing, as people are from different backgrounds, different emotional and social setups, what happened due to their differences in background and experience, they may encode or decode messages differently. Selective listening is a form of selective perception where we give the feedback in such a way like that it consists of only the positives, and it doesn't share it throw much light on the neg- negative part of the situation, which may have an impact on the communicators also. Like value judgment is where we judge give an overall value to the message based on his or her evaluation of the message's anticipated meaning, and then you get value to this. Source reliability is trust, confidence, and faith that receiver has in communicators' actions. So, what happens over here? Like we have to be cautious about some of these barriers based on we have to be cautious about some of the barriers based on like where is the block being created and how it is trying to reflect on the behavior pattern. So, like value judgments, source credibility, these are important parts of barriers that have to be taken care of. Next is filtering of the message. Like the communicator manipulates the information so that the receiver hears it positive, and it frequently occurs in upward communication. So that is, it is just generally telling like the boss what he or she wants to hear, and maybe it's not like the correct feedback. So, when you're again talking of in-group language, these are certain group languages, jargons developed by the members within a group, which that particular group member will only understand and not understood by others. So, we have to be careful of using those words and not using those words in a particular situation. So, it appears as the status differences and like time pressures, communication overload, all these things like will affect the behavior of the individuals and their performances in the organization, and we have to take care of these issues if we are to go for a better performance. And there could be like if you're not aware of these things, due to these things the barriers may be found, and these could be acting contra to the performance of the organization. What we can do is try to take corrective measures to check these barriers. There could be communication barriers between men and women also. So, it means like women talk in certain ways and men do talk in certain other ways. Like men talk to emphasize status, power and independence, complain that the women talk on and offer solutions and to boast about their accomplishment. And women talk to, like they're more on the social front, they talk to establish intimacy and connections, criticize men for not listening, speak of problems to promote the closeness like emotional bonding, and express regret and restore balance to a conversation where like something are not working. They generally share the regret and try to restore the balance in the conversation. So, if you can understand, like women are more of like they try to form more groups and more relationship oriented when you are talking of the barriers between what man communicates and wants to hear and what woman communicates. Barriers to effective cross-cultural communication could be semantics, the words connotations and tone difference and perceptual differences. So, communication could be there across cultural contexts also, like when it is a very high context culture, cultures that really rely heavily on non-verbal and subtle situational cues to communication. And in low context cultures rely heavily to convey meaning in the heavily on words to convey meaning in communication. So, what happens over here? Based on these two things, like the cultures that the people are in, people give importance to different things when they are in they belong to these different cultures, and accordingly the pattern may vary. So, while communicating in different cultural contexts, we have to keep these things also into mind. We also have a type of communication which is called, before we go on discussing like improving these communications in the organizations, we will try to discuss something which is on like defensive communication, which is aggressive and angry in nature and passive and withdrawing in nature, which leads to injuries, communication breakdowns, attention, then non-productive efforts, problem solving features. So, in defensive communication, what happens, like characteristics of submarines are either passive, withdrawn, submissive, or they are either they are passive or submissive, or they are very aggressive in nature if their defensiveness behavior is dominant in them. People take different techniques while they are trying to communicate defensively, like defensive techniques taken by boss are defensive techniques which are taken by boss are like your power play, like showing the power play, finish the report by month's end sort of thing. Then we are talking of put down things, like if like telling others, like if someone is capable, like I'll try to put you down, in the sense we compare you with someone effective and tell like this person would have been able to do this job more clearly. So, leveling someone as either as a fast learner or a slow learner, and raising doubts in the whole whole situation, like whether we can raise doubts, whether I can trust someone, and if you're not able to finish the thing in time. So these are some of the defensive tactics taken by boss. Defensive tactics taken by employees could be like misleading information in order to show that we have collected so many information, but we give misleading information to detract the evaluator. So scapegoating, like scapegoating some person in the organization so that we can blame that person. So telling hostile jokes and deception are some of the defensive techniques taken by the employees to defend their own interest. Non-defensive communication is one which is very assertive in nature and which is direct and powerful, and it provides the basis for defense, and it restores orders, balances and effectiveness when situations arise. The non-defensive communication is a powerful tool in the sense people get to know their self control and self-esteem, self-possession, and it helps in relationship building, and it helps to helps the listener to feel accepted and rather than rejected, because it is how that person interprets your cues. It's very important. So non-defensive communication is here. Self-control and self-possession are more important, as this is a speaker has a very centered, holistic role, assertive and control role in this communication. When we are talking of a different slab of communication, which is again very important part of communication, which is called non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication is that type of communication where in every situation words are not required. So there are 4 types of which helps in non-verbal communication. Basic types are, one is proxemics, like if you are sitting close to one another, that sitting techniques itself will determine what is the intended non-verbal communication that I want to send. Kinesthetics is study of body movement, facial and eye behavior is always there, and paralanguage, use of paralanguage. These are the 4 elements of non-verbal communication. When you are talking of proxemics, then every one, like even every animal has like it's what is called a territorial space. So just some degree around us is a comfort zone where we are, which is a very intimate zone, and then maybe personal zone, social zone and public zone. These are the 4 zones in a person's mind. So proxemics deals with how this space is being invaded or taken care of or respected by the tactics that we design for communication. What happens sometimes, the seating arrangements may tell like what we want people to do. Like if you want to communicate in certain ways, like if you want to make them cooperate with each other, then the sitting arrangement is something. If we want them to compete with one another, then sitting arrangement is certain things. And if we just to communicate, then sitting arrangements is something, and if no response is required, a non-communication, then we will do it in other ways. So the types of sitting arrangements that you are doing, this tells about the ways in which communication is done. So we can think of like, suppose this we want people to cooperate, this is where we want people to compete because one cannot see other, and this is where we want this person to communicate with this one, and this is where maybe they are not able to communicate with each other. So these things we have to be taken care of. Next, there is another part of nonverbal communication which is called paralanguage, in which the tones that we use, the voices that we use, pitch of the voice, tonal quality, interruptions inside, all this will determine like what we want to convey through this speech, or a message. So that is very important, like variations brought in to the speech through either through ways of speaking or accents connected or body movements connected to the ways of speaking. What is like the could be the disease of communication, if you can put it in that way, is failing to communicate in a proper way, and where that there is a lack of, where there is a lack of heartfelt communication, and we are just communicating from the head, just on passing on the message. There is less of emotional attachment and softness in what we are speaking. So and it shows less of personal integrity of the speaker who is communicating the message. So that's very important. All these things, like when we are talking of positive healthy communication, like it should be from head to heart, and then there should be some competence for it, and then emotional competence and personal integrity. These are important parts of healthy communication. So again, nowadays, like this information passed through communication technology, these are easing our life to a certain extent, because it helps us to communicate faster and it helps us to reach many people at a certain point of time. But again, it also affects our life. It also invades our life to a certain extent. Like suppose we don't want to communicate, we want to be our own self, we want to be with our family members, but due to this like high accessibility of electronic mediums, suppose we have become like ever reachable and always reachable quality of type of people, and as a result, like schedules of office hours become irrelevant, and considerations of time and distance become irrelevant, and sometimes like these time zones boundaries, geographical boundaries becomes irrelevant, and these may create tension, the stress on the individuals. So we have to understand where we need to stop and how do we need to balance all these activities while we are talking of communicating in the organization. That brings us to the last part of the discussion, which is now on improving communications in organizations based on the barriers that we have discussed, based on the characteristics of the different communications that we have discussed, based on like the defensive communication and the requirement of healthy communication. We now have to feature into how communication can be improved in the organization. So first is of course following up, attempting to determine whether you received the intended message was in which it was intended, so actually received it. Regulating information flow is one of the important issues that about the things that we have just discussed. It's we have to know like how to eliminate communication overload, and so and by the quantity and the quality of information that you need to maybe reject and not look into, and utilizing feedback in a proper way is one of the important things. Then developing empathy for people like who are listening to your communication, empathy for the receiver will help you to anticipate, could be how the message will be decoded. Repetition, so that this is what we are talking of, reflective listening, repetition of the message, so that we can understand, like we have understood the intended message in a correct way. So encouraging mutual trust is very important between, specifically between the manager and the subordinate, so that we can know, like we share information. There is organizational process of sharing information. We trust each other with the information shared, so that we know like it should not be misutilized. When this is done, the grapevines and rumors decrease in the organization, and people communicate to know the organization's purpose. There is less of guesswork, and deviance in the organization's purpose is not there. Effective timing is what we need to understand, so that like at a certain point of time, like employees are not bombarded with too many of information, and they have to prioritize those informations. So we have to use simple languages, so that people are able to decode it, even if they are not very conversant with a particular language. So effective listening is it is listening with understanding, and it helps you to decode the messages. And using of the grapevine is managers should know how to use the grapevine in a positive purpose, because if the grapevine starts functioning against the organization's purpose, and because it has got a great speed through which message can travel, and because of that high speed, then and there is less way to check the accuracy of the information, these can be devastating. The if message distortions travel through grapevine. We have to promote ethical communication, in the sense people should not intentionally deceive each other, they should not intentionally harm each other, and they should be treated justly. So whether there are certain issues of discussion, like to what extent privacy should be respected in the organization, regarding privacy of information shared. So whether we can allow for monitoring our communications, getting monitored by others, and organizations spying on whatever we are doing as a part of telephonic communication, emails. So these are the things that we need to be very careful about. We may think like we are just writing an email and others are not following us, but we could be under the surveillance lens of the organization who is monitoring all the emails that we are writing, or the phone calls that we have made to other people and other parties. So and those may act as evidence against us in later point of time. So we have to be very careful about these things while we are using organizational channels of communication at the work time, at the workplace. And there should be also some understanding, some points of agreement, some points of drawing the line. That is where to stop and where to begin. That balance should be there while we are talking of ethical issues in communication and what type of monitoring, to what extent, about what matters and what degree we can do it. So, this is and how to use it in a very responsible way. These are some of the issues that are related to ethical communication. We'll come to the questions over here, like what is the importance of communication in organization, justify with examples. What are the elements of communication, define communication process. What are the different types of channels and the channels richness with communication effectiveness. Discuss with suitable examples the different directions and levels of communication within organizations. Discuss issues related to communicating externally. What are the barriers to effective communication? So, how do you think of ways of improving organizational communication? How can the organization promote ethical communication? So, these are the important questions which help us to learn what is the importance of communication, how we get the sender receiver involved in the process of communication, how do we transmit messages which are important for the organization's smooth functioning and helping the team getting formed. In that sense, we communicate and we express our feelings, information, we share things, and the sender and the receivers understand it in the way they take a feedback, they come closer due to this process of communication, they work towards an organizational purpose. And also ethical communication is in the sense what to communicate, how to communicate, what should be the language that we should be using, what is the media that we should be using, what all information can we share with outside world, or should we be trustworthy enough to retain some of the organization's information which leads to the competitive edge for the organization, and we should not share it with outside things, outside world, so other competitors around. So or we should not use the organization's platform to just show some disrespectful opinion which is our personal opinion to others and use the company's channel of communication for it. So these are certain things where we have to be very responsible communicators and communicate in that way. If that is done properly, then communication works wonders for organizational effectiveness. Thank you.